Over to
All
you,
right,
Sam.
welcome everyone to our container security group meeting. Just to kick things off, we've got a number of items that we're wanting to either put through the planning breakdown process or start discussing in preparation for planning breakdown. So the first one is container host security statistics. We discussed this one a little bit last week. We now have designs from Kyle. And so in this, the plan is to add a new screen to our overview tab in the threat monitoring page.
Are you going to share your screen?
Screen here.
Ah, cool.
Yep. Let me try one more time. And along with this, we're making a few UX changes just because it starts to be a little bit unscalable once you've got three really large graphs taking up a whole lot of vertical space. So even though we're adding another graph, we are tweaking some of the other charts in here to make them smaller. As Kyle pointed out, we're changing the legend to make that a little bit smaller and more consistent with our style guide. We're going to update the headers to do proper capitalization there, and we'll have a new empty state for container host security. And then lastly, we'll be adding in the container host security graph or chart in here. And the metrics for that will be total activity evaluated or inspected, and then what percent of that was anomalous activity. So what percent of that actually triggered a policy, just to be consistent with the other items that we have here. So again, I know we've discussed this before. Are there any outstanding questions or areas that I can clarify as far as the requirements go for this one?
Just one from me.
Yeah, but Tiago, you have a question.
Thank you. Sorry, Wayne. So it sounds like we're looking to pull this data from Falco. Are you expecting something else?
So I'm viewing everything that we've put under our architecture for container host security as really one thing, at least in the way that we present it to users. We're not going to break it out and say, you know, this is AppArmor and this is Falco. So the principle here is any activity that we're able to monitor or inspect, that's what we want to count towards the total activity. And any activity that's identified as, you know, via policy is something that would be potentially bad. You know, that's the type of activity that would be considered anomalous. So it's very similar to, you know, probably the best example is the web application firewall. You know, one of the other products that we've got here, the web application firewall is inspecting all of the traffic as it goes through, but then you can write policies that identify, you know, anomalous traffic that you want to log, or then, you know, take further action on, either log or block. So I would expect it to be the same here, where, you know, the total activity is just, you know, all activities that we're capable of monitoring, whereas anomalous activity would mean that somebody sat down and took the time to write a policy, you know, specifically to either log or block that activity. So we do want to be careful to not double count, because we do have lots of technologies in play. So if Falco sees something and AppArmor sees the same thing, you know, we don't want that to count as two. That should really just be one activity between the two.
That's good. One thing in there is in order to show that, it implies that the counters that we're seeing, we can determine whether it's anomalous or not. So if we have the counters but we can't determine anomalous versus not anomalous, then we wouldn't be counting it there, right? So for example, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so if the user, you know, sits down and writes a specific policy to, again, either log or block, that's what would be the defining threshold for anomalous.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if they're neither logging nor blocking, then that would not count towards anomalous.
Yeah, Arthur will probably know more than me here, but for example, AppArmor, I think it can emit a lot of audits in a what is it called? It's the unrestricted mode, or uncontained, something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's anomalous. It's just collecting that information. And if we don't have a policy that sort of filters or identifies what's good or bad, that's an extra step that needs to happen there for us. Does that make sense, Arthur, or am I worrying about things that are not real problems?
I don't really see the problems up there yet, but I guess I don't really have a deep technical understanding of AppArmor, and from my understanding, the way it interacts with Falco is a bit strange, so we might not even get up there in the first iteration, so I wouldn't worry about AppArmor right now.
That's cool. And for planning breakdown, I think we got what we need anyway, Sam. I think that we can hash this out as part of refinement. So if Arthur's okay to move this to refinement, I am too.
All right. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so the next one for planning breakdown, I know we have a number of items to get through today, is the container host security controls. I don't have designs for this, and I wanted to ask, do you feel like we need designs for this? I mean, obviously we need to work out the exact text that's put in here, but I mean, this is pretty well in line with everything else we've done, and I'm just wondering, you know, is it worth getting full-on detailed mocks from Kyle, or would his time be better spent somewhere else if this is relatively straightforward? I mean, again, here we're really looking for, you know, just an extension on that operations Kubernetes application page, like we've done for all of the others.
That's right.
We're not uninstall button.
We're not trailblazing here, right? It's just using what's already in place. So in terms of design, wouldn't help much. But I did paste a link in the chat, which is an issue for the Falco Sidekick installation, and it happens to be under a different epic, I think. So perhaps a bit of house cleaning and just see what's already out there. And I was pretty sure there was one for AppArmor as well, but I couldn't find in time for the meeting. So I just think there are already things sort of in flight that belong in here.
Yeah, so it looks like this is one that was created as part of refinement. So this looks like it's an implementation issue.
Yeah.
Whereas I created this epic as kind of a high level feature. So I don't know if this implementation issue is installing via the UI, or if it's just installing it like via YAML or via, you know, the CI/CD pipeline, or I don't know what that means. It's kind of a blank issue right now. So I'm not sure if that's duplicate or not.
Which is why I brought it up, just to make sure that because if we were doing as I think I created this issue. If we're doing that as part of the active response, and now it's got an overlap with a different epic, at least we should make sure that it's an incremental delivery towards the same direction, that we're not going separate paths, or maybe just unify them and make them the same one. Just calling it out.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not exactly
that's a good one to keep an eye on. Okay. Well.
So, can I take an action to go see if there are any other issues there? If you want to help me, I appreciate that as well. But I think there might be one for AppArmor hanging out there somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe we just need to move those, you know, if they're under the wrong epic, maybe we just need to move them under this epic instead. Again, I don't know what the intent was during that refinement category. Like,
yeah, the intent was just to enable the other epic. So it was probably be the bare minimum possible implementation. I don't think he would have involved UI.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. So I guess we have 2 action items coming out of this. If we feel this is ready for refinement, then 1, we need to refine it, and then 2, we need to do a review of those other ones to make sure there's no overlap. But again, just to be explicit, and so I can show it here, you know, just like everything else in this page, you've got a description, you know, and an install, uninstall button. I would expect it to look similar to this. It would have a GitLab, you know, icon, since we're using that for all of our items now. And, you know, it would just have a basic install, uninstall button. Probably this Prometheus one is the best one to look at as a template, only replace that icon with the GitLab icon.
I just wanted to clarify, we had the discussion multiple times when we're doing the same for Cilium, but CI-based pipelines can't be triggered from this screen. So with Cilium, we just show in the state, but buttons are essentially disabled. So you have to go and trigger pipeline in management projects yourself. Is it okay to do the same for host security controls?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because it's a more difficult user experience, but I think that's okay. You know, if it at least shows the state installed or uninstalled, then it still helps to give it a place in the UI and raise visibility and awareness as to what's there. So if you're not able to actually do the install or uninstall, then I guess this changes slightly from, you know, actually allowing them to install and uninstall. Is really, it's just pointing them to the documentation and providing some visibility around the current state.
Did I capture this correctly, Arthur? Do you have the document open?
Yep, that's correct.
So I'll take an action item to update the requirements to reflect that. Our discussion here today, I think I can do that right after this call. Is there anything else we need before we're comfortable moving this to refinement? All right, we will move that to refinement as well. And then lastly, so we have the alert dashboard MVC. It looks like there's a number of comments here. I'll go ahead and pull this up. We did have Kyle and myself, and he's not able to attend because he's in a different time zone right now. But just a few questions that we had as we started to work through this. You know, here's sort of a rough wireframe for it. Does it make, you know, one question we had was, does it make sense to show this cluster column? My understanding is that, you know, for all of our technologies, our WAF, you know, container host security, container network policies, all of those are specific for an environment and also a cluster. And I think a project can have multiple clusters, but I just wanted to double check that I'm accurate in that and I'm not off base there, that as we generate these alerts, there would be both an environment and a cluster associated with each alert.
I would say there is no reason to show cluster because each environment can only have one cluster, and it's like we try to abstract the infrastructure itself with the environment everywhere in our UI. So showing cluster is not bringing much information at the same time, just takes quite a bit of space. I'm a bit confused just on this particular screen. I have an environment dropdown, but at the same time, environment in the table. Is it because
This is to let you filter.
Right. Okay, it makes sense. It's because we can show all environments. Yeah, to answer the question, I would say cluster is not necessary, because user probably know the cluster behind each environment.
So I guess another question then, would it make sense to show namespace as a column?
No, similar answer. Namespace is generated by us for each environment. So again, it's one-to-one relationship and it's transparent. And I think we also try to hide namespaces as hard as we can in most places and just show environment.
So I thought that a cluster could have multiple environments.
Cluster
I'm
can
not
have
mistaken.
multiple environments, but environments can only have one cluster.
I see. And the relationship between project and environment, there's not necessarily any one-to-one relationship there, right?
Project can have multiple environments. You can think about environments like production or staging or some other like deploy for the review app, that like we use environments for that too. So each project can have multiple environments. Environments goes to just one deployment platform, which in most cases is a Kubernetes for us. And then each environment will go into specific namespace that we generate and deploy. The best current reason about it is probably operations environments. I think you have to get into the project, like go to network policy demo project, for example. And it's a bit easier to reason this way. Yeah. So you can see your environments, and it's essentially namespaces, and that's how we essentially call this deploy board, and this is how we are essentially abstracting operations.
Okay, that makes sense. So where there's a one, environments always only have one cluster, and environment is the more specific of the two.
Yep. So environment essentially is a composite of deployment platform and deployment namespace. Yeah, in the code. So I would just leave environment, and because
I mean, I'm just trying to think if there is ever a use case where they would want to filter by cluster.
I don't know.
Instead of by environment.
It's hard to say if there is such use case, but maybe just check metrics page. I think metrics page is also by environment. So because these alerts are really close to metrics, maybe follow the same paradigm for now. But
well,
yeah.
So also I wonder if we only show environment, could we run into a scenario where the names are identical? Like you have a production environment in cluster A and a production environment in cluster B, and just showing the environment is not enough to identify which environment it is if you have the same name across multiple clusters.
No, names of the environments are unique per project. In this case, it's not possible to have two production environments in a single project. You can only have two production environments on the same cluster on a different projects, because your alerts tab is scoped by project. It's not possible to have multiple environments with the same name.
Got it. Okay, you've convinced me. We don't need cluster then. So yeah, we'll get rid of that and just go with environment for the column. Let me see if I can hit all of Kyle's questions here. Okay, so his question about filtering by cluster is not applicable since we're removing cluster from this model. So they'll just be able to filter by environment and policy name. We could have them filter by date and time as well, but maybe we take that back for the sake of de-scoping it for the MVC. Okay, so other questions. So again, just note, like, we have a lot more we want to do in this screen, but again, we've tried to make it as absolutely minimal as possible for this MVC. So for now, the plan is just to have a dismiss action item, and that will be the only action item. You can click dismiss. When you do that, it kind of grays out here. I mean, this is a rough wireframe, so it's not great to see, but it fades away. And then you have this undo dismiss button that you can optionally click to bring it back for a period of time.
Not to get us too far ahead in the roadmap, would the plan be to add checkboxes in there like we do for vulnerability management on the left at some point?
Yep, that would be an important future improvement. We have a pretty long list already, but I don't think I have an issue for that one yet. But absolutely, like, that's something we're going to have to do, is let you select multiple alerts and do bulk actions off of those.
Cool.
Any other questions, comments, feedback on this one? It's probably worth noting that for this, our initially, the only alerts that we'd be sending in would likely just be Cilium alerts, similar to how we've kind of taken the lead on policies with Cilium. Cilium is just further along than all of the other technologies. So, to start off, we would extend the policy management workflow to let you be able to create, an action of sending an alert. And then we would also just have that alert show up here. So it really is kind of just a very minimal step. We're not trying to include, WAF or any of our container host security technologies in here just yet. Although obviously that's the long-term vision. We would just start with container network policies for the initial MVC. All right. Well, if there are no other questions.
Just one around
Thanks
the
for your
timing.
time.
Sorry, Sam, late coming.
Sure.
I see the design issue is it's got a milestone of 13.2. So is your intention to finish that as part of 13.2 so we can have the scope locked down?
Yes.
Cool. So we'll probably go to planning breakdown and refining on 13.3.
No, I would hope to put it through planning breakdown in 13.2.
Okay. So
yeah, so for all of these that have a design issue, I try to get those done in the milestone that they're in.
Right.
Otherwise, it becomes a really long process,
yeah, no,
just to
I
get
see what you
something
mean.
ready for development.
Sounds good.
So no, I'm hoping that by next week we can have this one finalized and ready to move into refinement by our next meeting.
There's going to be a little bit of sort of backstage work in defining that, because we don't have a model for alerts, so we need to design that and come up with something, right, Arthur?
We could need quite a bit, honestly.
Yeah.
Beyond that, yeah, but I guess it's better to just do it as a part of requirement, right? Not worth discussing right now.
No, yeah, just setting expectations that there's even though it looks simple, there's a fair amount of work in the back just because it's a new feature.
It's not
and
just
I don't know.
Yeah, the problem.
Go ahead, Arthur.
Yeah, the problem is that we just can't hook up to Cilium. We need something like a piece of glue code, like an agent or something that will monitor Cilium and then like trigger stuff in our database. So we have not done that before. And that's a bit of, I guess, slowdown there is expected. Maybe we can align with some orchestration work is being done, but it's progressing really slow, so I'm not as helpful. So we probably need to do something ourselves.
I know before when we talked, I think you were planning to pull that through Hubble. Is that still something that seems reasonable, or would we be dependent on that, container agent issue that the monitor team is building?
We're going to need something similar because Hubble is essentially a stream of data. You can subscribe to certain things, but because it's not like processed, and we obviously need it in a special format before putting into the database, we need something like some kind of code that will transform Hubble events into alerts as per our definition. I guess agents that orchestration is working on could be a convenient place for that because it's already being deployed to the cluster, but they're still in the early stages, and I wouldn't put us as a dependency for them right now. We could progress a bit further, faster if we will do it ourselves.
Got it. So you're saying that we do need to have that work done first?
Yeah, I think it's just the technical details. We can do the screen, but we obviously need to like subscribe to Hubble events, process Hubble events in some form, create a database model in our code in GitLab project, and then put the processed events into our database so they can be presented in the screen. And then obviously once it's done, we can just do a simple front-end stuff, work around the database table.
One thing to just keep in mind as we scope this is, the likely scale of data that we're going to end up having here. I would expect too that these alerts would be, even though most of this is very similar to what Monitor is doing in alert management, it's possible that we're going to be dealing with a whole nother order of magnitude. And so, that's just a consideration, as we go about architecting this, how do we continue to maintain reasonable performance standards when we go to search and sort and filter?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really have a straightforward answer. I need to do investigation. What is monitoring doing? Maybe we can even fit into their model. Like we did, for example, reused a lot of monitoring code in metrics for Cilium. So maybe there is a use case of that for us for alert specifically. Yeah, again, it's better to just move it to refinement, and we will go to the technical breakdown of things, and maybe, yeah, as a part of that, we will spot which part of monitoring code is relevant to what you're trying to do.
Okay, well, sounds good. Kyle and I will continue to iterate on this one, and hopefully we'll have it ready to finish the planning breakdown process next week. All right, well, thanks everyone.
Thank you.